Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy. But America's agriculture landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertising campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food to the store where you buy the final product and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Here in Kansas, farmers and ranchers take great care of their livestock. But what happens if there is an outbreak of a disease in a livestock population? How does it get under control, and what must a farmer or a rancher do to mitigate the loss and stop the spread of the disease? The Kansas Department of Agriculture, or KDA, has developed a Kansas Secure Food Supply Plan to help implement biosecurity at operations to keep diseases out. We will take a deeper look at the Kansas Secure Food Supply on this episode of Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
The KDA has been working with Kansas milk, beef, and pork producers to develop the Secure Food Supply Plans in conjunction with materials available through the Center for Food Security and Public Health's National Secure Food Supply Plans. So, what is the Secure Food Supply Plan?
The Kansas Secure Food Supply Project is an outgrowth of a project really that Iowa State University kind of kicked off a few years ago. And it's really looking at how do we work with industry, work with our partners across really the whole agriculture sector, but in that livestock industry, to help them be prepared in the event of a high consequence foreign animal disease. So right now, if we have a high consequence outbreak, and so the thing that we sort of plan for is foot and mouth disease. That's kind of our worst case scenario in Kansas, because it affects all cloven hoofed animals. So we're talking our cattle industry, whether it's feedlots, cow-calf. It's going to affect our swine industry. It's going to affect our dairy industry. It's going to affect other industries too, sheep and goats, things like that.
If foot and mouth disease was reported, confirmed, I should say, anywhere in North America, so Mexico, United States, or Canada, the Kansas Animal Health Commissioner would issue a stop movement order. And in a stop movement order is just what it means. All movement of animals and animal byproducts or products would be stopped. No movement of animals is allowed, and then it'll be against the law if you do. And in that particular case, the animals that are en route, they will get stopped at the Kansas border. Okay, and then there's going to be some predetermined offloading sites, maybe at 4-H grounds or there's predetermined sites where those animals will be offloaded. So just when the stop movement order that I'm referring to is transportation of animals in trucks and vehicles and trailers and that type of stuff. So yeah, animals are free to move wherever they are on the farm. But if I want to move animals from my pasture to another pasture, or from a pasture to some pens, that will not be allowed during a stop movement order. It's really to keep the state of Kansas clean. We don't want the contaminated animals, contaminated products coming into our country, into our state, if you will. So in that case, cattle trace or a disease traceability system, a mandatory ID system would be used to be able to quickly identify what other animals this animal has been in contact with. So for instance, if we say animal number 1 shows signs and symptoms of foot and mouth disease, from a cattle trace or from a data standpoint, you can go back and say, where has animal number 1 been? Okay, and you go back, and if we had a disease traceability database, you plug in animal number 1, okay, it will show that animal number 1 has been at farm A and it's been at farm B before that. And we can go back and look at farm A. Okay, look at the animals that was at farm A at the same date and time that this animal was there. What other animals corresponded with that? And let's say now we have animals 2, 3, and 4 that was at that same farm at that same time. Now, where are animals 2, 3, and 4? Now, animals 2, 3, and 4, heck, they could be in Oklahoma, they could be in Texas, they could be in eastern Kansas, they could be in western Kansas. So the trick is, how quickly can you go find animals 2, 3, and 4, other animals that interacted with it, right? There were cohorts with this animal, and go back and quickly notify me as a farmer or somebody else as a farmer and say, hey, just so you know, animals 2, 3, and 4 were exposed to an animal that was known positive or has symptoms of foot and mouth disease. And again, that goes back to the quickness. Speed is absolutely paramount in a disease outbreak like this. So how quickly can we go back and identify other animals that potentially come in contact with this and somewhat isolate them or keep them from the herd so they don't start spreading the virus to other animals within that herd.
Just so we can get a handle on where is the disease right now. Where is this potentially moving? Because one of the challenges with a disease like foot and mouth is the incubation period of that disease can be 5 to 7, sometimes up to 14 days. The challenge is an animal can become infected, can start reproducing the virus and even shedding the virus before it ever shows clinical signs. And so because in Kansas we're an import state, we bring cattle into this state from every other state in the nation, from Canada, from Mexico, to be fed and then to be slaughtered. Our fear is that if we have a disease like foot and mouth disease and we don't stop movement, we're going to be so inundated with the disease that we'll never get our arms around it. So we stop movement right away, even if we don't have cases in Kansas, so that we can get an idea of where is the disease. So our fear is also that we may already have the disease, we just haven't found it yet. We may have brought in animals that are infected, they haven't started showing clinical signs, and so we want to limit that movement as much as possible right away.
Once we get all the animals stopped, all the movement stopped, and we can truly assess the severity of the situation, is the disease spreading? And a stop movement order may last 7 days, 10 days, 2 days, don't know, but the likelihood it'll probably last 7 days, maybe 2 weeks, something like that. And the whole purpose again is just to understand the severity of the disease. How far has it spread? Again, we talked about earlier about how the models would suggest how fast that the disease can move. So it's going to take some days for us to just establish where has the disease progressed. If the disease hasn't moved out of a certain area in Canada or a certain area in the United States, then that stop movement order will probably be lifted a little bit quicker. Once that stop movement order has been issued, then to start moving animals again, we will need to go on from a permitting process. So again, if we go back from myself moving animals from this pasture to this pasture, I will need to have a permit, and that permit will be issued by the Animal Health Commissioner here. And this is just specific to Kansas. The other states are a little bit different, but in Kansas, that's how that'll be. I will need to apply for a permit to move. Now, one interesting thing is before I can receive a permit, I need to have a documented enhanced biosecurity protocol for our operations. And really what the enhanced biosecurity protocol would be is just as it says, enhanced. So it's enhanced, it's more than what we'd normally be doing, and it's focused on biosecurity containment, or in our case, keeping the disease out of our facility.
The secure food supply plans then are really going to be our mechanism to get that movement started back. Now that we've kind of shut things down, we get that movement started back by utilizing these plans. And each industry is a little bit different, obviously. With dairy, milk has to move very, very rapidly. If you're a cow-calf producer, you can probably wait a little while longer before you have to move animals. And so we look at each industry a little bit differently, and that's why with these plans, the secure food supply plan, the secure food supply project is sort of all-encompassing, but we have individual plans that are tailored to the dairy industry, to the swine industry, and to the beef industry, because each one sort of brings up unique challenges and unique opportunities based on how that industry works. So how do we work with them to create an enhanced biosecurity plan that is going to protect their animals, it's going to keep them safe, even above and beyond sort of day-to-day biosecurity? That's goal number one. We want to keep these animals as safe and as healthy as possible. But then goal number two, during a disease outbreak, there's likely to be some sort of movement restrictions put on movement both within the state and across state lines. That could be of animals themselves or animal products like hides, like milk products, things like that. So these plans, while they're really focused on animal health and biosecurity, they're also a way for us to feel more comfortable about permitting movement while we're in a disease outbreak, because we can go to that operation, whether it's a dairy, a swine facility, a feedlot, we can go to them, we can say, look, show us your biosecurity, show us that you're doing this enhanced biosecurity, give us your animal health records that show that everything is normal, we have no signs of infection, we have no signs of a problem, and we're going to feel better about permitting and allowing that movement because we don't feel like we're going to spread the disease because of the steps that are being taken by that operation.
After a stop movement order is placed, for a farmer or rancher to get a permit to move their livestock again, they must have a pre-approved biosecurity plan consistent with the Secure Food Supply template and will need to be able to illustrate that they are actively implementing the plan. Priority will be given to low-risk or extremely necessary movements, like milk, since it has a shelf life. As the outbreak progresses, there may be changes to the requirements for obtaining a permit. To get the permit to move livestock again, the KDA will have a dedicated team as part of the overall response that is handling and coordinating permit requests. The means for obtaining a permit will be part of an overall public education campaign that KDA will implement during an outbreak, along with coordination between industry groups. To prove an animal or herd is not infected with the disease will depend on the disease. For foot and mouth disease, for instance, there is no test to prove negative, so a combination of active observational surveillance, epidemiology, and biosecurity will be used to ensure that a movement is as low risk as possible. For a disease like African swine fever, on the other hand, a testing requirement may be initiated either by the USDA, KDA, or another shipping or receiving state. In this instance, a surveillance plan will be approved, such that a certain percentage of animals would be required to test negative before an entire lot is moved. What would happen if an animal or herd were to be infected?
What would we do if an animal showed signs or symptoms of the virus in our farm? The first thing you do is we have to report it. We must report it to the state animal health vet, and then an investigation will start. And an investigation, a foreign animal disease investigation, would be looking at where did this disease come from. Our country is free of this disease, so it had to have arrived here somehow, either intentional or accidental. So we live in a global society, so I could pick it up in another country. Anybody could pick it up in another country on our feet or on our luggage or anywhere and be brought in accidentally. The other way it could be brought in would be intentional. We live in a different world than we did 20 years ago. There's certainly a possibility of somebody bringing that disease in and intentionally trying to hurt us. But if we had it, there would be an investigation that would happen, and we need to try to figure out where that happened. Was it intentional, accidental? Where did the incidents come from? Right now, our country doesn't have a very robust system to trace back any type of disease, whether it be a foreign animal disease or just a normal animal health disease. We're in the state of Kansas, there's a pilot project called Cattle Trace, and Cattle Trace is trying to build the infrastructure or demonstrate the infrastructure for disease traceability.
In early 2018, the Cattle Trace collaborators began working to develop a purpose-built infrastructure to track cattle movement through the supply chain. Cattle Trace utilizes ultra-high-frequency technologies to collect the minimal data necessary, including an individual animal identification number, a GPS location, and date and time in order to track animals in the event of a disease outbreak. Tag readers will be located at livestock markets, feed yards, and beef processors. For more information on Cattle Trace, go to cattletrace.org.
As a whole, right now across the state, we're at about 1.5 million head of cattle. When you look at feedlot capacity that are now protected under a secure beef supply plan. And so that works out to a little over 30 feedlots, but that's a big chunk of our total now that we've taken care of on the beef side. On the dairy side, we've again really tried to focus on our large dairies to this point, dairies that ship more than 1 truckload of milk per day. Of those, we've got about 17 dairies on board across the state, and it's something that we're continually reaching out and opening that up more to more and more dairies really across the whole state. On the swine side, swine is very interesting in the sense that right now there's an ongoing disease outbreak in China, the disease called African swine fever. We don't talk about it quite as much as foot and mouth disease because we use foot and mouth because it covers cattle and pigs. African swine fever is just a swine disease, but it's potentially could be more devastating to the industry because whereas foot and mouth is highly contagious but has very low mortality, African swine fever, if we were to get that in North America, our swine are very susceptible. We could be looking at something like a 90 to 95% mortality rate. So the industry is very, very in tune to that right now. And we have an excellent sort of partnership going on right now between the Kansas Pork Association, the National Pork Board, and our office in trying to get more and more swine producers across the state involved in the Secure Pork program because they see it as absolutely vital to their business interest in the event that African swine fever kind of makes that jump from China over to the United States.
The Cattle Trace Project will help track and hopefully contain the spread of disease in cattle across Kansas. But what does the Kansas Department of Agriculture currently do to prevent foreign animal disease outbreaks? And what do they do to detect them?
We do routine surveillance on a regular basis with our agency. We work closely with USDA as well. We have field veterinarians that work closely with our producers to just do day-to-day surveillance. And so if there's a disease or there's signs or symptoms that pop up in animals, we have veterinarians that can go out, can do diagnostics, take samples to make sure that we don't have anything like that that is actively going on. That's part of a larger network across really the nation. The USDA works with Department of Homeland Security, with Customs and Border Patrol, really to make sure that these diseases that would be really high consequence stay out. And so we look at things like foot and mouth disease, African swine fever, classical swine fever, avian influenza, things that other countries deal with on a regular basis. We work very, very hard to make sure that those don't impact our industry here in either the United States or really in all of North America. Now, once we have a disease event ongoing in Kansas, in North America, that's when sort of our day-to-day operations change into a response mode. And so that's really where we spend a lot of time practicing, we spend a lot of time exercising and planning so that we can be prepared to go from sort of those day-to-day regular operations into now, how do we respond in a way that we're gonna serve the industry by stopping this disease outbreak, getting it cleaned up, getting the sick animals dealt with, and then getting the industry back on its feet really as quickly as possible is the ultimate goal.
The Kansas Secure Food Supply Plan is a voluntary option for suppliers to adopt as they see fit for their operation. Though many have chosen to adopt the plan, some still choose not to participate. So why have some producers chosen not to make a plan like the Secure Food Supply Plan a priority to their operation?
So when we go out and talk to folks about the Secure Food Supply Plan, I think the initial reaction is somewhat, I wouldn't say skeptical, but there's an initial reaction of, hey, we've got things that we deal with every day. You know, a major foreign animal disease, something like foot and mouth, they know it's out there, they know it would be bad, but they're dealing with, things today. And so initially we kind of have to get across that threshold of, well, if this were to happen, it would be utterly devastating. This isn't the kind of disease outbreak, or this isn't the kind of sickness that is very easily wrapped up or easy to get over. Once we kind of get that idea across, I'll put it this way, we have yet to go and visit with someone, meet with someone, work with someone, really explain the plan and have them turn us down. Everyone that we've worked with and really sat down with and talked through this with them, their reaction is, we need to do this. We need to be part of this. We need to be ready so that if and when this happens, our industry as a whole, not just this one individual piece of it, but really the industry as a whole, is ready to respond and really can bounce back as quickly as possible. It's sort of the analogy of a tornado in the sense that no one really wants to think that their house may potentially get hit by a tornado, but we know that because we live in Kansas, our risk is higher than other places. And so we have to be prepared. We have to be ready for that. It's very similar with a disease event like this in the sense that our risk in Kansas is higher than it is in a state like Mississippi or a state like Kentucky, where they're mostly small operations and they're sending their cattle to other places to be fed out and be slaughtered. Well, where do they send them? They send them here to Kansas. And so as a state, our risk is higher than other states. And so we understand that. Our industry understands that. And so it's those conversations that are being had that I think is really leading to a lot of buy-in.
And you don't have to look very far to look in the news and see how devastating a foreign animal disease, which African swine fever is, very contagious, and just demonstrate what could happen here in the United States. How fast it spread throughout China from farm to farm to farm. It really ought to be alarming for us in America to think we aren't immune to that happening here. You know, the disease we're most worried about that's so rapid, that's so contagious in the beef industry is certainly the foot and mouth disease, but there's other like diseases, contagious diseases in other species that we should be worried about as well. And the secure food supply plans apply the principles of a food supply plan is really just a mindset of preparedness. So what do I mean by preparedness mindset? It would be, how do we sit down right now in what we call, let's call it peacetime right now. We're not in a disease outbreak time. How do we sit down in peacetime and design a plan that which we can wall ourselves off or protect ourselves from the rest of the world? It's really a defensive tactic like we talked about earlier. Is, okay, so now people just can't just come and go on our farms. Our farms are historically very, very porous. I mean, people just come and go. There's multiple entry and exits out of the farm. How do we have one entry point for vehicles? And if a vehicle crosses what we call a line of separation, then how is that vehicle washed and cleaned and disinfected before it comes across? Because again, as we talked, that virus can be carried from farm to farm from a vehicle. So we need to be able to minimize the entry points into the farm for both people and vehicles. One analogy is, when you talk about the food supply plans, is we're going to build a moat. You know, like the old days of a castle, we have the castle wall and we have the moat that surrounds it. We're going to build a moat around our farm. And the only way to get into the castle is somebody has to lay down the drawbridge and allow people, and then somebody says, yep, you can come across the drawbridge, or no, you cannot. And then when that person comes in, you raise that. Obviously, we're not going to build a moat around our facilities, around our farms, but that moat principle, that's what we're talking about. So we're going to build a moat, we're going to build the wall, build a fence, whatever you want to say, around our farm, and control who comes in and who comes out. And then there's going to be a protocol for both vehicles and people and animals coming across that so that they are clean and disinfected properly. So we minimize the spread of the virus, if you will, inside our farm.
What we would love to see is a total nationwide adoption of these plans. Again, they're out there right now in that any feedlot in any state theoretically could go in and take the guidance, develop a plan for themselves. What we've really done in Kansas is try to take that to the next level of saying, we're gonna build these plans into our overall response plan, but we're also gonna provide people to go out to the industry and help them develop those plans. What we would love to see is that same kind of commitment, really nationwide, whether it's something that's led by the industry itself, whether it's something that's led by the packing industry, or if it's led by the states. It doesn't really matter how it gets done, but that's what we would love to see long term, is that this just becomes a regular part of doing business. That as a nation, we are as prepared as we possibly can be, again, whether it's in Kansas or it's in Rhode Island, that our producers are prepared for this kind of an event and are ready to potentially respond, but hopefully by being so prepared that once something like this happens, it really limits the overall impact that it will have on the industry.
The impact of a foreign animal disease on the Kansas agriculture economy would be immense. Implementing enhanced biosecurity plans can prevent a disease from entering the premises and will lessen the amount of time needed for the Kansas Department of Agriculture to issue a permit to move animals and/or animal products in the event of an outbreak in North America. The movement of animals will help to support the economic viability of these industries during an outbreak. For more information, or if you'd like to become involved in the Kansas Secure Food Plan, or if you want to learn how to develop your own biosecurity, please contact Emily Voris at 785-210-7741 or email her at emily.voris@ks.gov. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Real Ag on the Kansas Secure Food Supply. As always, you can check out this and other episodes of Real Ag by going to shptv.org. From the producers at Smoky Hills Public Television, this has been Real Ag. Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
The Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.